For too long, mental patients have been faceless, voiceless people. We have been thought of, at worst, as subhuman monsters, or, at best, as pathetic cripples who might be able to hold down menial jobs and eke out meager existences, given constant professional support. Not only have others thought of us in this stereotyped way, but we have also believed it of ourselves.
That is a quote from Judi Chamberlin's book On Our Own, Patient-Controlled Alternatives to the Mental Health System. It was written in 1978, but does it still hold true today? Well, what do you do when you have a mental illness? Or what do you do when you think you have a mental illness? You seek help from a professional and you go to their office to do treatment. Good job. Now you work on yourself with guidance from a professional and you feel better. So now, how do you see yourself? Sick, disordered, broken, repaired? How do others see you? The same, different, scary, pathetic? Let's put a pin in that and go back to Judi. She experienced voluntary and involuntary commitments to psychiatric facilities, which led her to advocate for rights of psychiatric patients. Her advocacy efforts led her to writing On Our Own, which became a seminal text for the Mad Liberation movement. The Mad Liberation movement was started by people who experienced sanus depression from their mental health classification and from the system that controlled their diagnoses and treatment. Advocates and survivors used techniques to educate themselves and members of the public, care for each other, and to resist their ongoing oppression by the mental health system. Members of the movement are people with mental illnesses who may identify as some, none, or all of the following labels like mental patients, ex-patients, consumer survivors, ex-inmates, mad, crazy, nuts, etc. Members adopt these labels to reclaim offensive terms that have been used to oppress them and or to describe their feelings about their treatment.
If I am consumer survivor of the mental health system, it means that I have choices and that I am an active participant in my treatment. When I consume scotch. I did not consume psychiatric drugs. They were forced down my throat.
Judi explains liberation as such.
It is only in this decade, with the emergence and growth of the mental patients' liberation movement, that we ex-patients have begun to shake off this distorted image and to see ourselves for what we are. A diverse group of people with strengths and weaknesses, abilities and needs, and ideas of our own. Our ideas about our care and treatment at the hands of psychiatry, about the nature of mental illness, and about new and better ways to deal with and truly to help people undergoing emotional crises differ drastically from those of mental health professionals.
The Mad Liberation movement sprung forth in the 1960s and 70s from consciousness raising in the feminist movement about sexism in mental health care, radical professionals, the gay liberation movement's resistance to psychiatric labels, self-help ideologies, collective action movements, and the mental hygiene movement. In North America, the mental patients' liberation movements went from forming an uneasy alliance with radical therapists to forming self-directed groups that practice self-education and total democracy. Some of these groups were called mental patient associations, or MPAs, which allowed survivors to join together to advocate for patient rights and other issues that impacted them, like housing and poverty. Although each MPA was uniquely based on its membership, they did share values with the movement and sought to incorporate these values into their organization. One such group from the UK, Survivors Speak Out, articulated its principles as such. The lives of mental health service users are of equal value to those of others. Mental health service users have the right to speak for themselves. There is a need to provide non-medicalized services and support. Service users' first-hand experience should be valued. Discrimination against people with experience of using mental health services must end. These MPAs were democratic collectives that allowed community members to vote on the organization's direction and services to address concerns that impacted them directly. For example, the Vancouver MPA ran a 24/7 drop-in and housing program because of the lack of community support for ex-patients. whereas the Toronto MPA ran a flea market and other events to generate income and jobs to address unemployment in their community. Many organizations also produced newsletters or magazines that centered on the writings of ex-patients and other members of the MAD community. Activists in Vancouver produced In a Nutshell, and in Toronto they produced Phoenix Rising. These publications were influential on the movement because they featured powerful critiques of the science behind psychiatry, first-hand accounts of the abuses patients were subjected to, efforts to mobilize around issues of poverty and housing, and creative explorations as to what constitutes madness.
Once in a rare while, a wondrous power descends to crown me king of the world. I can be anything, do anything, go anywhere, meet anyone. All around my lightning flashes, and life in the smallest detail becomes significant. But alas, my friends grow fearful for themselves, for me, so I'm banished to that grim fortress where bearded magicians smoking pipes exercise their peculiar art to drive the power away. The bubble bursts, the ship sinks, the plane crashes, and I come down hard. It's all for the best, I suppose, but on days like this when I'm dead inside, I remember the power and yearn for the crown.
These organizations were impactful because members had control over their care, and they created a community of people with similar experiences. Additionally, it impacted the movement as a whole because it demonstrated the power of marginalized voices when they collectively worked together to advocate for themselves. The next 2 decades were marked by a significant backlash and retrenchment with the rising influence of psychiatry and the pathologizing of people's behaviors. Additionally, legal rights won in the 70s and 80s were gradually rolled back, and new laws were introduced to curtail the rights of psychiatric patients. A significant discourse that emerged during this time was to place the blame on deinstitutionalization for social inequalities experienced by survivors. This shifted the blame away from systemic issues like underfunding of the social safety net and undermined the advocacy efforts of survivors to end institutionalization.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. We crazies can heal ourselves of the destructive side of madness. We need others to understand that we are the primary victims of this destructive side, while acknowledging that others are too often subjected to its effects. We can heal ourselves when we have the space and time to learn how to bring forth the creative side of madness. Individually and collectively, we are working to acquire the skills required to shift from destruction to creation. Yet under the current regime of state-run and for-profit management of madness, the conditions for acquiring these skills arise all too rarely. We hope that societies will recover their lost wisdom by coming to recognize once again the tremendous potential that resides in our unorthodox imaginations. We remark that this potential is already recognized in a select few, among whom privileged individuals are often business leaders and entertainment stars. We long for the gap between the select few and the abandoned multitudes to be bridged. We await the time when our epiphanies are no longer misrecognized as mania or psychosis, when our dry spells are no longer misrecognized as depression, when our frenetic energies are no longer misrecognized as ADHD or borderline personality disorder, and when our search for an inner place of refuge is no longer recognized as autism. A time will come when our body and minds are no longer declared incompetent, and are no longer regarded as accidents waiting to happen. A time will come when we can laugh and cry, love and hide freely and without fear. A time will come when there will be no punishment for allowing our imagination to run wild.
MAD Studies was born from the MAD liberation movement and is committed and accountable to the MAD community and their struggles. There are 3 defining characteristics. It is based on separation from the biomedical model to prioritize social understandings of madness from disciplines like social work, feminism, queer studies, disability studies, sociology, and other cultural studies. It values experiential knowledge, which connects it to MAD liberation principles of prioritizing survivor experience and knowledge. It seeks to include experiential knowledge of allies, professionals, researchers, and loved ones to build an alliance between them and the MAD community. The goal of the framework is to critique biomedical psychiatry and to develop radical counter-discourses. It recognizes sanism as an oppressive force in people's lives and challenges sanist practices in all institutions, especially those that provide care for mentally ill people. This framework critiques the current system of mental health care by problematizing the narrow focus on the individual rather than the social causes of mental distress. They note that neoliberal policies have contributed to widespread inequality that increases mental distress, while simultaneously gutting the mental health care system in favor of private, individualized solutions. So let's go back to that person in mental distress from earlier and think about the world they live in and how they experience it. If we examine this world using the lens of MAD studies, one might see how their distress is connected to powerful social structures like capitalism and neoliberalism. It might show how their care is constructed within these structures and how those structures define mental health care. It also prioritizes their experience of madness and seeks to give voice to those experiences. It connects them with other voices of madness and values its connection to the MAD community. Mental health care that subscribes to a biomedical model of care has important limitations because it is exclusive, objectifying, and individualizing. These limitations mean that treatment can be administered poorly, without transparency, and in violation of someone's right to self-determination. However, it is worth mentioning that not every person accessing mental health services shares these critiques or concerns. Many resist challenging biomedical models because they provide valuable affirmation that their mental illness is real. Also, there are concerns with replacing one monolithic theory with another. So where does this leave us? Confused? Angry? Indifferent? Well, as your trusted narrator, I will offer some suggestions for next steps. Learn more about MAD studies and the MAD liberation movement. There are so many amazing resources that have been made about this topic, and I don't think that only one resource, even this video, could scratch the surface. I was moved by the poetry and readings of ex-patients. I have taken the time to list some of my favorite and encourage people to look them up. Review and reflect on how you write, speak, and/or think about people with mental illnesses. Then do it again, and again, and again. It is important to think, what is the idea or story I hold, and what does this story or idea do? Challenge yourself and/or your organization to integrate and amplify the perspectives and experiences of people who access mental health services. If you don't know how to do that, search for people and places that do. Where possible, connect to the communities you work with in an ethical way outside of your practice. Whether you agree with these ideas or not, take in the perspectives and give value to these critiques. These critiques are being issued by marginalized voices about a system that has a considerable impact on their happiness and well-being. I hope that this video illuminates the effort and sacrifice that has been put into creating this movement, and more importantly, how this movement is connected to so many people's ability to not only survive, but to also thrive.